I have the immense pleasure of welcoming Assen Agov to the English edition of Visible and Invisible, our effort to relate the Bulgarian and non-Bulgarian world. Assen Agov's professional life began in a communist period as a journalist. He has not only been one of not so many Bulgarian war correspondents and knows Africa particularly well, but he became in the early 90s the first free-minded head of, at the time, the only TV broadcaster, and together with another famous Bulgarian journalist, Neri Terzieva, courageously began the never-ending reforms of state television. Following the former Communist Party's comeback, Assen Agov became a first-hand participant in the political life of the country. He had 5 consecutive mandates as a member of parliament and has been one of the main designers of Bulgaria's foreign policy at a key point of the country's history. A year ago, he published a wonderful book, his memoirs, under the title, Good Evening, Ladies and Gentlemen, The Flight of Bulgaria to the Free World. Welcome, Assen, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thanks for the invitation, Martin.
Your book is a really remarkable story, not only of your role in reshaping the country, but in its seemingly unique, it is, as a book, unique, intertwining in a rather unique way, the fascinating, multifaceted story of your parents' families with the 20th century history of Bulgarian society. How hard was it to write the book, and how long did it take?
Well, I never knew that it's so hard. I'm the 600 words author, usually as a journalist. This is the limit of anything that could be listed. And made my plans. I understood that it will take a lot of time and a lot of effort, because writing a book is a different story than writing an article or a commentary or anything else. It took me 2 years. Of these 2 years, I spent about 6 months in planning the book and doing the research. So that's how it worked. I had pauses and lapses in my working enthusiasm, but anyway, this seemed to be normal, as I was told by other authors of books. So it was quite an effort.
What is really astonishing is the frank, sincere, really wonderful way in which you narrate your grandfather's, both of the grandmother's story, and it really, to me at least, it's a real picture of the story of many leading Bulgarian families with people close to one side of the ideological spectrum and people close to the other side of the ideological spectrum. For those that haven't read your book, just to say that the person that you're named after, which is your grandfather, was killed in 1923. He was
25. I'm sorry.
Sorry, in 1925. He was a sympathizer of the left-leaning Peasant Party, which had been overturned 2 years earlier. So it's just an example. Would you just say a couple of words about your family for those that don't know about it?
Well, my granddad was one of the founders of the Peasants' Party. And it was only normal for my grandfather to affiliate with the party. And he was a pilot. He was a fighter pilot. He was flying all these double-deck planes. So he was fighting first in the Balkan Wars, and then he was fighting in the First World War. his plane was shot, and he was a bit maimed by this catastrophe. And he later on he became involved in promoting the civil aviation in Bulgaria after the victors in the First World War imposed a ban on military aviation in Bulgaria. He was killed he was murdered actually by the police in a kind of horrible events in 25. Bulgaria and Sofia became the first country with a mass terror attack in the church. 150 people were killed. And then the authorities, the government, started to kill, practically murder, all its opponents. So it was a murderous period. I'm telling this story not because of any emotion towards the past of my family, but just to show how it developed in Bulgaria, just to show that it was only natural, because of weak politicians, only natural for Bulgaria to affiliate with Hitler and Mussolini, and then paying a terrible price by the occupation of the Soviet Union. So, an installment of communism.
I'm smiling because of your word natural, because that could open a totally different talk, and we do have limitation in time. I would really suggest anyone reading Bulgarian to read Assen's book, and I very much hope that your book will be translated in English in the future. Now, fast forward to the early 90s. Do you have any heroes among those that led the transition from the communist period during these 30 years among the East European countries?
Well, we were busy, all of us, in all Central and Eastern Europe, that got rid of communism and Soviet domination. We were busy with our own business. We didn't know very much what was happening over there in the other countries. Of course, we were following, but it was very superficial, the following. We were really involved in our emotional and very busy life during the early years of transition. We never knew it would be so hard, because there was no example of how to pass from the dictatorship that communism is, of the tyranny of communism, towards a free society and open society. So there was a lot of intrigue in all this time, political intrigue. And I must say that most of the people, including me, were not prepared to face the intricacies of political life in a democracy. I don't think the communists did, because they survived the fall of communism, transformed to social democrats in most of the Central and Eastern European countries. And they pretended that they are democrats, but they were not. They were really paying tribute to their past and to Marxism, and Bulgaria was ruined again.
Do you know of anyone, not just Bulgaria, but from Poland to the Baltics to Romania? Do you know of anyone who has written a similar book that intertwining political history, family history, and personal political experience?
When I was doing my research, and let it not sound a little bit immodest, I found out that there was a lot of writings, but most of them are scientific and researches. There is no book, I emphasize this, there is no book that shows how it was during communism, the time before communism, and through the life of a single family telling a family story. And it's astonishing. I mean, very small number of books are published on the realities of life during communism. Really. I found out that you can count them on the fingers of your two hands. There is a film, a German film, which was directed by a West German, not an East German. There is a book by a Belarusian author who got a Nobel Prize for literature. But otherwise, you cannot find much. And I wonder why it is just like that in all Central and Eastern Europe. Probably people are feeling, people like of my generation, trying to forget all this. I don't want to remember it. But
you describe this is an interesting episode of your life. You describe in the book your father's aborted plan to emigrate to Canada with your mother and you, which was thwarted by the sad loss of your beloved grandmother in 1964. Have you ever thought about an alternative life in Canada? How would it have been?
Well, when he told me that he was planning a flight to Canada, he planned everything very, very meticulously. And first we had to go to Italy, then spend some time in one of the transition camps there for Eastern European immigrants, and then move eventually to Canada. But I was disturbed because I had a girlfriend in Sofia at this time, one of my first loves. Then I thought that I have to stop my studies in high school, and I have to transfer my studies to Canada. Fortunately enough, I was speaking English, so this wouldn't have been very, very difficult for me. But anyway, this was a major transition for me, and I suffered a lot when he told me that. But then my father told me, there is no future for you in Bulgaria because you're from a family that's on the blacklist. So they won't let you study in the university, and they won't let you do anything that you would like to do. So that was it. He convinced me, and then I accepted his decision. But later on, as I said, tragic events, made us cut all our plans and go back to Bulgaria. Fortunately enough,
but still, can you imagine yourself as a Canadian today?
Now I imagine myself as a citizen of the world.
All right.
So it's not only Canada. I feel comfortably both across the Atlantic and Europe.
You haven't described very much the afterlife, if I can put it that way, meaning your children. Does anyone now live abroad?
My generation is reading the book because it concerns a lot of people.
Of course.
And a lot of families, tens of thousands of families have a similar fate.
Maybe even hundreds of thousands.
Probably hundreds of thousands, yes. And most of these hundreds of thousands have in their families victims of communist repression, being it concentration camps, being it killed during the repressions. So it's a story that has to be told, and I'm sure that though I dedicated the book to the born after the year 2000, but I do this. I don't think they will show much interest in that. So I'm planning.
They should.
record it on YouTube, reading it on YouTube. So probably this will make it more interesting for them.
Let's hope so. Let's hope so. Let's try to basically let's try to come to the current time and pick on your expertise. I would like to say that your book ends with a blueprint for a rather audacious constitutional reform that would force central government, Bulgaria's government, to relinquish some of its powers to 6 elected regional governments and create the second parliamentary chamber that has been disputed and lacking for over 140 years. What makes Bulgarians special? Why haven't we done this? Why hasn't Bulgaria been able, despite the remarkable success of people like yourself, why haven't we been able to engineer the flight to the free world? Why has it not been possible to have a more sophisticated political order after 143 years of relatively independent existence?
Well, since independence, Bulgaria was not initially independent after the war between the Russian Empire and the Ottoman Empire. It was a vassal of separated in two, vassal of the Ottoman Empire, half of it, and the other half vassal of the Russian Empire. So when it declared independence, the constitution that was adopted in 1978, yes, was written along the lines of the Belgian constitution, omitting the decentralization of Belgium.
Mm-hmm.
So even the inscription on the facade of the traditional parliament building, the old one,
Mm-hmm.
is borrowed from the Belgians. But it stops here. It was a country that was a constitutional monarchy by rule, but it was practically ruled by the king. The king was the dominant figure.
Mm-hmm.
Later on, when the communists took over under the directions of the Soviet Union, Kremlin, they kept the system because it was very good. It was a pyramid, and on the top of the pyramid was the Communist Party and its leader. So it was very comfortable to govern this way.
Mm.
Your word is word of law when you govern this way. So what and then the last 30 years, no government found enough political will in itself in order to introduce subsidiarity to really spreading power downwards.
What, in your mind, what would be the odds or the likelihood of at least parts of your plan or blueprint to come to life? Do you see this happening in the next years, in the coming years?
Well, Bulgaria is, because it needs it, because it was practically in a permanent political crisis since 2009.
Mm.
The last elections in early April were the first regular elections.
Mm-hmm.
We had three snap elections during these 12 years, and no stable government, no clear majority in parliament.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a symptom of the endemic illness of Bulgarian democracy. It needs this subsidiarity. It needs regional governments, elected regional governments who can master their finances and their economies, and a much smaller central government that will take care of foreign policy, defense, and let's say probably education. Though education has to be transferred.
This is a good point for me to ask about your foreign policy expertise. What would be your priorities if you were to be foreign minister today? Why, let me maybe give some background about the question. I think we would both agree that the world is in just as you said about Bulgaria, is in a kind of permanent, not just political, but social and economic crisis since at least 2008. And Europe faces some really daunting issues. So this is the context of my question. What should Bulgaria's foreign policy priorities be today?
I think this should be the foreign policy or the policy priorities of the whole free world. We have a security system that dates back to the post-World War period. All the security system was created as a legacy from World War II in order to avoid another world conflict. It was working during the Cold War, but now it's worn out, completely worn out. We are living in a different world. When this system was created, there were 17 democracies. When NATO was established, there were 19 democracies in the world. Now we have roughly 100 democracies with different levels of democracies, but democracies, people living in the free world there. So
some of them are less liberal than others. This we have to add.
Yes. Some are less liberal, but still the democracies. We can have some remarks for this and that for everyone, but they are democracies, and even the discourse of the security system is invalid anymore. We have this division, East-West. We don't have it anymore. Some people speak about multipolar world. There are no multipolars in nature. There are two poles, the north and south. In electricity, there is the anode and the cathode, the ions and the anions. So in chemistry, that make this world run. So it's a bipolar world again. It's a bipolar world, and it's divided along this dividing line.
So what could a country?
Free world and authoritarian world. And let me, Martin, just another small remark.
Please.
More than half of the population of the world lives in democracies. So the authoritarian regimes holding, let's say, about 1.9 billion people, and most of them live in China.
But within this context, what could a mid-sized European country, with the political difficulties that we know we have today, what would the country like Bulgaria be able to do? What should we do? What would be number one, number two, let's say European policy priority, and any priority with respect to Turkey, Russia, what have you? I mean,
it doesn't depend on the size. It depends on the thinking. If we raise our voice and say that we need total revamping of the security system of the free world, I'm sure we'll find enough people all over the world, the free world, that would agree. I think we should go further on to establish a Freedom Alliance. When I say alliance, along the lines of the North Atlantic Alliance, because it's North Atlantic is part of this obsolete discourse. Neither North nor Atlantic anymore. It went out of its sphere of defense and its area of activity in Iraq, in Afghanistan. So we need a strong alliance with a new treaty that goes along the lines of the Washington Treaty, and definitely keeping Article 5, which
let
means
me let, let,
one
let
for
me
all and all for one.
let me try to refocus a bit and still try to pick your brain. Just in a few sentences, what would, in your mind, or what should, or what would be, if you were the priorities of the Russian ambassador in Sofia or the American ambassador? How do you feel they could support their own country's interests and yet be useful to Bulgaria?
Well, ambassadors are looking after the interests of their countries, and they follow the instructions from their capitals. So we can't expect for them to be more than just vocal in expressing their opinion on what's going on in Bulgaria. And they're very careful because they're diplomats. But their governments listen to their reports, and they should be more active. We see now that the new American administration is taking a serious look at the developments in Bulgaria and all over Central and Eastern Europe and Europe as a whole. And it's important that this is part of the news coverage here in Bulgaria.
You have, as I said, and as you know, you have really vast experience. What I would like to ask you is a comparison with other East European countries. There are, I think, from having read and spoken to you, you believe that there are more similarities than differences in the evolution of the constituent countries of Eastern Europe during the last 30 years. And yet, to take Poland and, let's say, Slovenia as two examples, they seem to have done considerably better than Bulgaria. So how can we explain the similarities, and also the Baltic states, which were even part of the Soviet Union? I mean, considering the similarities, what could we have done differently or better, providing the essence of the national psyche, our history, and in a way predicament?
Well, it is strange that there is a little public talk about what we need. People are interested in other things, and they don't have to invent what we need. It's up to the politicians and the experts to offer a viable plan how we can move forward, and then communicate that with the broad public. And I don't think I see any effort in this direction. So hopefully this will start now with the last elections. I found the last elections, though undecisive and bringing a hand power, I think they are the beginning of rethinking what we need in order to be completely free and to finally conclude our flight to the free world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm eager to see this discussion, public discussion, and a broad public discussion, and I'm ready to participate in it as a journalist and as a man who had a certain experience in the failures of the Bulgarian movement forward.
Would you consider your own thoughts about the similarities as potentially useful for this discussion? Because there are indeed a lot of similarities, and I wonder, would you briefly describe the similarities so that people get some willingness to participate in such a discussion? Because we need more people to be willing to have this discussion.
Well, my very modest observations throughout Europe, and I visited all countries of Central and Eastern Europe. I think I haven't been only in Albania, and I've talked a lot to colleagues, members of parliament, journalists, and just people whom I know of different courses of life. And I can tell you that when we discuss how is it in each of our countries, then we find the similarities. The similarities is that my generation is still, or part of it, smaller and smaller, nostalgic about communist times because it was part of their youth. Not myself, not feeling any nostalgia towards these years. Then I find out that the younger generation, which was born after 2000, is really not knowing exactly the recent history of each of their countries. And this is a major deficit in training all these young people to understand that freedom is not given by God. Freedom has to be fought for. And this fight and this struggle is constant because you can lose it, it can slip away in just a day. So they have to be trained in order to fight, to be ready to fight for freedom. That's one similarity. And another is, well, the rise of nationalist feelings as a counterpoint to the globalization and the European Union integration, which is the wrong way. I mean, these are mostly politicians who are practically lying there electorate. We can go nationalist and patriotic as before, because globalization is so deep and so inevitable that it doesn't work if we don't speak the same language when we think about our future. Now, the problem of the free world is with globalization is that it doesn't regulate it. It did find the instruments, the tools that will allow a better regulation of globalization. So, and this, of course, is bumping the wall of nationalist governments. We've seen this happening in the US, in the previous administration. We've seen it happening in the UK with the Brexit story. And we see it with some of the right-wing parties in, let's say, Germany, Poland, Hungary, Italy.
We are when you mentioned Brexit, and of course we could give the example of the US 5 years ago, and even in the recent elections. We should start talking about technology, but this would be another long discussion. You dedicated your book, as you said earlier, to those born after the year 2000. And let me use this as an introduction to some discussion about the future, about your thoughts about the future. How did it happen that the notions of freedom and liberty seem to have lost the radiance and seeming irrevocability? Like 10 or 15 years ago, we would not have, I think, predicted the rise of the kind of sentiment that you just described. How did it happen? Why? Where should we look for the explanation?
First of all, let me single out greed, human greed. The financial speculation that led to the crisis of 2008, and it ruined the trust of major segments of society towards the functioning of the system. Though through printing new money, which was euphemistically called, how was it, quantitative easing. This didn't help. It helped momentarily, it helped the banks, but it didn't help the people and their standard of living. So now we have the pandemic. And again, we're printing money. Again. Trillions are going to be spent in order to overcome this disaster, all the crises that will follow this disaster. And then, because there is no regulation and no clear policy by politicians to invent the laws that will regulate, for instance, social media, for instance, global communications, for instance, global defense for freedom of movement and maritime travel and holding of all this chain of supply. So,
but once again, this is what you are describing is a wish for better politics, better regulations. Well, I mean, how could we dream about better people at the top of European politics? Looking at what happened in Germany, unbelievable corruption scandal at the top of the German parliament. The similar stories we can hear in other countries. How could we dream about better people at the top of Europe?
First of all, rule of law should be sanctified, because all this corruption is also penetrating the judiciary. So, and that's how people lose their trust. They don't see any real justice.
Of course.
They don't see real justice. They see that the rich and the divide between rich and middle class is even the scissors are opening even more now after the crisis of 2008. They say, okay, the rich can have everything. We don't. We could be less affluent, and nobody will take care. So this, first of all, people should be taken care of. Any government, future government or present government, should make clear that they work for the people and they don't work for their survival, political survival. Because what I see now is most politicians are thinking about their political survival and not about their mission, which is to help people live better.
Do you see such people today?
I think. Well, let me say, I'm of course not a kind of a dreamer of all this, but I think the pandemic will help us understand that if we don't care about people, which now is imposed, the care for people is imposed by the pandemic, then this will bring a major change. A major change of government attitude towards their own electors, voters. Once they get into the House, the Parliament, or Congress, or whatever it is called, the National Assembly, they start thinking about themselves, not about the people.
Do you trust? I mean, taking on from what you say, do you trust that human rights will be protected the way that they have been, at least in Europe, during the last 50, 60 years? I mean, of course, Western Europe before 1990. Do you think that human rights are safe?
Well, I don't think so. I don't think so, because of this division in society between rich and poor. So there are more human rights for the richer people than for the poorer people. And this is not Marxist talk. This is
No, of course not.
deeply human talk. Human talk.
Of course.
This has to be overcome.
One change in the world, which seems to be ahead of us, which is very peculiar for Bulgaria, because we all believed in low taxation and not very large government, is the American government's insistence on similar tax rates around the world, which was more an issue with some European countries for us until now. So we could predict the growth of government and the growth of tax rates even in Bulgaria, which would not contradict what you just said. It would be one effort to palliate the issue that you raised.
As you know, for subsidiarity and
you mean taxes at the regional and city level? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm strong supporter of a small central government and much more active local government.
So let's hope your blueprint will come alive before the world or the European Union crashes on our low tax rates.
I think the taxation, the flat tax, which was it was a hit 10 years or 15 years ago among financiers, but I think that it's not just enough. It's not just enough for all people. So I think there should be a tax reform enabling regions to collect taxes for themselves and create financial stability for the regions, and setting up a much lower budget, national budget for the central government, because it won't need it, because most of the money will be spent in the regions and not by the central government. This is very important. And then I can tell you that there is no chance for big government. I think there is a chance for regulation, and we need administrations to provide this regulation of the global financial and economic process. But the most important thing is rule of law. This should be really kept as straight and as integral as possible.
This is very clear.
Because it has to defend human rights, human freedoms. It has to defend our freedom. And it showed very well during the post-election period in America.
This is clear.
Because if they didn't have this judiciary, this kind of judiciary, they could have fallen under a very dark period of time and losing much of their freedom.
Thank you, Assen. It was really wonderful talking to you. I really appreciate your time, and thank you, the team of Visible Invisible. Boyko, Eolita, Vasil, and thank you, Kalin Manolov, the founder of Visible Invisible. And to all of you, thank you for listening, and talk to you in a few days.